Every morning, I pulled on that uniform before the sun came up. Size XL now, my belly pressed against the buttons. And every morning, I walked into that building, the one that carried my husband's last name on the glass, and I mopped the floors that his grandfather built. If you think you know where this story is going, I promise you, you don't. Stay with me. Because what happened inside those walls changed everything. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel invisible by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that like button right now and don't you dare click away. This one is for you. My name is Celeste, and for 3 years I was the best kept secret in a building full of men who thought they knew everything. I want you to picture the lobby of Hargrove and Lyle Associates. Marble floors, high ceilings, the kind of place where every surface is polished so clean you can see your reflection in it. Important men in important suits walked through those doors every single day. Senators, defense consultants, federal agency heads. They came to talk about billions of dollars and national strategy, and they did it over catered lunches and leather chairs. And me? I pushed a cart with a squeaky wheel through those same halls. I collected their coffee cups. I wiped down their conference tables after they left. I was there before they arrived and gone before they noticed I existed. That was the arrangement. That was what my husband Derek had asked of me. Derek Hargrove. The name still sits heavy in my chest when I say it. He was charming, ambitious, and completely terrified of his father. When we fell in love, it felt like something out of a story. Secret dinners, late-night drives, the kind of love that feels like it was made specifically for you. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitating. When his father refused to accept me, because I was black, because I came from Alabama, because I didn't fit the image of what a Hargrove wife should look like. Derek didn't fight him, not really. He asked me to wait. He asked me to be patient. He asked me to take a job at the firm, just temporarily, just until things settled down. I should have known then. But love has a way of making you rewrite red flags as love letters. So there I was, 8 months pregnant, pushing that squeaky cart, wearing that uniform, invisible in a building that had my husband's name on the door. My coworkers stepped around my mop bucket without looking at me. The security guard at the front desk had stopped greeting me after the first month. I was furniture. I was background noise. I was nothing, except I wasn't. Because every morning, before I put on that uniform, I checked 2 phones. One was cracked, old, the screen barely holding together, the one Derek knew about. The other was sleek, fingerprint locked, and completely unknown to him. And that morning, that particular Tuesday morning that would crack the world in half, that second phone had buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with an email that most people never receive in a lifetime. But I'll get to that. Let me tell you about the boardroom first, because that's where everything broke open. That's the moment I need you to feel in your chest. It was a high-stakes client meeting, the kind Hargrove and Lyle only held twice a year. The room was packed. Senior partners, government liaisons, 2 men from the Department of Civil Infrastructure, and a senior senator named Caldwell Burke, who had flown in from Washington specifically for this meeting. Derek was at the head of the table, performing. That's the only word for it. He was loud and polished and full of energy, the kind of energy that comes from wanting to impress people who have power over you. I came in to collect the bins. Routine. I always did the East Wing conference room during the 11 o'clock hour. I wheeled my cart in quietly, kept my eyes down, moved to the far corner where the waste bin sat full beside the credenza. My belly made everything slower now. I had to turn sideways to fit between the chairs and the wall. That's when my cart's wheel caught and squeaked. Loud, sharp, the kind of sound that cuts through a quiet room like a blade. Every head turned. I kept moving, reached for the bin, didn't look up, And then I heard Derek's voice, smooth, easy, performed, saying to the room, "Sorry about that, gentlemen. Even the cleaning staff thinks they're invited today." Light laughter, a few polite chuckles. I didn't stop moving. Then, quieter but not quiet enough, to the colleague beside him. "God, look at her, pregnant and still mopping floors. Some people just have no self-respect." The room responded, not all of them, but enough. A ripple of laughter moved through that table. Senator Burke, silver-haired and self-satisfied, smiled into his coffee cup. A junior associate stared at his notepad like it held the answers to something he hadn't been asked yet. I lifted the bin, tied the bag, replaced the liner, turned my cart around, and walked out. My hands didn't shake. My face didn't crumble. I had learned a long time ago that dignity does not require an audience to survive. But in the hallway, the long marble hallway that Derek's grandfather had built with his own ambition, I stopped. I pulled the sleek phone from my pocket, and I made a call. "Tell the legal team we're confirming the press schedule for Friday," I said. "Nothing changes." I want you to hold that moment, because Derek was still laughing in that boardroom, and I was already scheduling the end of everything he thought he owned. Now I need to take you back, because you deserve to understand who I really am. Not Celeste Hargrove, the janitor, the other one. Before I married Derek, before I ever agreed to step into the background of someone else's story, I was C.L. Fontaine. That was the name on my contracts, my federal correspondence, my firm's letterhead. C.L. Fontaine. No photos, no press appearances, no social profiles. Just a name that moved quietly through the corridors of federal procurement with a track record that spoke for itself. I had built Fontaine's Savile Group over 11 years. 11 years of night school after long days. 11 years of driving to meetings in cities that didn't know my name and walking out with agreements that reshaped budgets. I specialized in federal infrastructure strategy, emergency housing development, civil shelter networks, disaster response construction pipelines. It was unglamorous, complicated, deeply technical work that most people didn't understand and even fewer wanted to do. But I understood it. I had grown up in the kind of town that needed it. I had watched my grandmother's neighborhood flood 3 times in 10 years with no government response. I built my career out of anger at that silence. I registered Fontaine Civil Group under my grandmother's name for protection, Loretta May Fontaine. I kept my face off every document I could. In the federal infrastructure world, I was a ghost with a golden reputation. People knew the work. Almost nobody knew the face. When Derek asked me to step back, I restructured the firm to run without my daily presence. I brought in a trusted operations director. I stayed connected through the sleek phone. To the outside world, C.L. Fontaine had simply gone quiet for a season. What Derek never knew, what he never thought to ask, was that quiet is not the same as gone. 3 weeks before that boardroom moment, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Infrastructure had been finalizing the most significant federal contract in 30 years, a $4.3 billion National Emergency Shelter Development Initiative designed to build permanent infrastructure in underserved regions across 15 states. They had been reviewing proposals for 14 months. They had narrowed the field to 3 firms, and on that Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., while I was buttoning up my uniform and feeling my daughter kick against my ribs, that email arrived. Fontaine Civil Group had been selected. I read it twice. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the flooded streets she had walked down in rubber boots, shaking her head at a government that had forgotten her. And then I put on my uniform, and I went to work. I went to work because I had always finished what I started. Now, here is the part that still makes me catch my breath when I think about it. Senator Caldwell Burke, the man who smiled into his coffee cup while Derek mocked me, had personally championed the Fontaine Civil Group proposal 6 months earlier. He had reviewed our full infrastructure portfolio. He had pushed our bid forward in committee. He had called the work the most strategically sound housing proposal this department has seen in a generation. He had done all of that without ever meeting C.L. Fontaine in person. All federal correspondence, all encrypted and formal. So when I walked into that conference room with my squeaky cart and my swollen belly and my cracked phone in one pocket and my sleek phone in the other, I already knew exactly who Caldwell Burke was. I knew his voting record on infrastructure bills. I knew his committee assignments. I knew he had just spent 6 months advocating for my firm's $4.3 billion contract. And he laughed. He laughed at the pregnant janitor who had no self-respect. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I certainly did. The contract signing was scheduled for that Friday, 3 days away, and Senator Burke's office was listed as one of the attending parties. Derek, meanwhile, was celebrating. He had convinced himself and his board that Hargrove and Lyle were about to win a major federal defense consulting subcontract, something that would stabilize the firm for the next decade. He booked a private dinner. He told his board this was their moment. He was electric with it, the way he always got when he believed a victory was already his. What he didn't know, what I had known for months, was that Fontaine Civil Group and Hargrove and Lyle were drawing from overlapping federal budget pools. Infrastructure and defense consulting shared funding allocations under 3 specific agency accounts. When Fontaine won at the scale we were winning, those allocations shifted. Hargrove and Lyle would lose federal priority status on those 3 accounts automatically, not as punishment, just as math. Derek had never looked at the infrastructure sector closely enough to understand how it connected to his own world. He had never looked at me closely enough to understand who he had married. Both of those blindnesses were about to cost him everything. Friday came the way important days always do. Quietly at first, then all at once. The federal government released the official announcement at 9 a.m. Fontaine Civil Group. $4.3 billion, 15 states, the largest civil shelter initiative since the post-war era. By 10 a.m., federal infrastructure reporters were already writing. By noon, the story was everywhere. The problem, or rather the gift, depending on where you were sitting, was that C.L. Fontaine had almost no public profile. So journalists dug. A sharp young reporter at a federal affairs outlet pulled registration records, found a maiden name connected to the firm, found a marriage record, found a photograph from a small Alabama ceremony 3 years ago. By 2 in the afternoon, the headline read, "Billionaire contract winner was working as a janitor at husband's competing firm." Derek was at a board lunch when someone slid a tablet across the table to him. I have imagined that moment many times. The way his eyes must have moved across the screen, the way the name registered, the way the photograph, me in that uniform, belly and all, would have landed in his chest like something cold and heavy. His chief financial officer, I was told later, spoke first. The words were calm and precise and utterly devastating. "Derek, we just lost federal priority status on 3 agency accounts. The budget pool redirected to Fontaine this morning." The celebration dinner reservation sat on his phone, unconfirmed. He canceled it alone. The contract signing ceremony was held that same afternoon at the federal building downtown. I wore a tailored charcoal suit. My hair was pulled back. My heels were low. I was 8 months pregnant. I had some sense. I felt Loretta moving as I walked through the lobby, as if she already understood the weight of the moment. Senator Caldwell Burke arrived with his aide and 2 colleagues. He walked through the door and stopped. I watched the recognition move across his face like weather. First confusion, then something slower and worse. The particular shame of a man who has just understood what he did. I walked to him, extended my hand, smiled with every bit of warmth I genuinely felt, because I had decided weeks ago that I would not perform anger for anyone. Anger was Derek's currency. Calm was mine. Senator Burke, I said, it's wonderful to finally meet in person. He shook my hand. He had no words. The aide beside him glanced between us, sensing something large and unspoken filling the air. The photo from that handshake was taken by a federal press photographer. It ran the next morning in 4 national publications. The internet received it like a fire receiving oxygen. I went home that evening, not to celebrate, to finish the last thing that needed finishing. Derek was there. I hadn't expected that. He was sitting in the kitchen with his jacket off and his tie loose, looking like a man who had aged 5 years in a single afternoon. When I walked in, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even shame. It was the look of a man who has finally understood a language he had been hearing for years and ignoring. I didn't give him a speech. I want you to know that. I didn't need to. I said this. I stayed because I loved you. I mopped because you asked me to be small. I was never small, Derek. You just needed me to pretend. I had already packed what mattered. My legal team had filed the separation paperwork 3 days earlier. The same day, the contract confirmation arrived on the sleek phone. My grandmother's house was paid off. Loretta's future was already a document with numbers on it that would make your head spin. And there was one more thing. One last layer that even Derek's best attorney didn't see coming until the property records were pulled. 2 years before any of this, before the boardroom, before the contract, before the humiliation, Fontaine Civil Group's property holding division had quietly purchased the building that housed Hargrove and Lyle Associates headquarters. Derek's firm had been paying me rent for 2 years, every single month, without knowing it. I walked out the door and let the silence explain the rest. Loretta arrived 11 days later, healthy, loud, and furious at the world in the best possible way. I held her in the hospital room at 4 in the morning. Just the 2 of us, the machines beeping softly, the city quiet outside the window. And I told her about her great-great-grandmother, the woman who walked flooded streets in rubber boots, the woman whose name had been on my firm's paperwork since the beginning, the woman who taught me that dignity does not need a crowd, that power doesn't require permission, and that the loudest thing in any room is often the person nobody thought to look at. I named her Loretta. The first photo I posted publicly, the first time C.L. Fontaine and Celeste Hargrove and every version of me appeared together in one place, was a simple shot of me in that hospital bed, holding my daughter, looking straight into the camera. No caption about revenge, no clever words about karma. Just this. She came into the world already worth more than the room that tried to shame her mother. 4 million shares in 48 hours. They looked right at me and saw nothing. And I need you to understand that was never my burden. That was their blindness. I had spent 11 years building something real in the dark, with no applause and no audience and no one sliding tablets across tables to congratulate me. I had done it because the work mattered, because the families in those underserved towns mattered, because my grandmother's flooded street deserved someone with a plan and the will to see it through. Power doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it shows up in a size XL uniform with a squeaky cartwheel, doing the work while the room laughs and signing the contract when no one is watching. Never let anyone make you feel small for being quiet. Quiet is just what power sounds like before it speaks. If this story moved you, if you've ever stood in a room where someone looked through you like you weren't there, share this video right now. put it in front of someone who needs to hear it today. Like, subscribe, and drop one word in the comments that describes Celeste. Just one word. I will read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.